Hello, welcome back. This is Roger Royce with the 10,000 Startups Podcast. I'm a partner with Haynes Boone in downtown Palo Alto. We do emerging growth and venture capital, and each week we bring you original content on an issue of interest to startup companies. And today we're back talking about one of my favorite topics, QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. But this isn't about the typical rules that you're used to hearing about, how you avoid gain. This is what you do if you don't meet that 5-year holding period, but still don't want to pay tax, because we have a hack for that. My guest here today is Brady Weller. Brady is the director of Vint's Retail Partnership Program. He also is in capital markets at Vint and QSBS Brady works with a rollover program that he's going to tell us about. For those of you that may have exited your company, you sold your QSBS, but you didn't hold the 5 years. So now what do we do? So Brady, thanks for being here. And why don't we just jump right into it? And maybe you can add a little bit more context and meat around the rules that I just mentioned, the rollover rules.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Roger. I mean, you do a ton of great work in the Bay Area for folks, founders all over the place around QSBS and all manner of other things. So we appreciate you. Thanks for putting this together. Yeah, I think you did a great job actually back in the spring. I believe it was March. You had a sort of QSBS overview podcast. So I'd sort of direct everyone there if you want the deep dive on what is Section 1202, what is QSBS, who's it for, those kinds of things. But at a high level, I guess I can just say that qualified small business stock is a treatment under Section 1202 of the Internal Revenue Code that offers investors, founders, shareholders of early stage companies that meet certain criteria the opportunity to exclude tax from their gains from the sale of their stock in the future. So whether they've sold stock through a traditional merger and acquisition type process, or if they've sold stock through a secondary transaction, any proceeds or gains from the sale of stock that fits under the code under 1202, up to $10 million and up to 100% of that amount could be federal income tax free, and in many states also free of state gain tax as well. And so for your listeners in California, the potential savings here is maybe around $2.38 million per 10 of gain. And for our friends in New York who have a really high both state and also sort of if you're in Manhattan proper, an additional gain tax could be as high as 35-36%. And so we're looking at potential savings of $3 million, $3.5 million per 10 on exit. So QSBS is certainly extremely powerful, or can be.
Okay. And yeah, we've had a fairly extensive set of podcasts on that. Let's
Mhm.
talk about the rollover under Code Section 1045, the rollover provisions. How does that work?
Yeah, rollovers are sort of not sure how to categorize them. A lot of people have heard of them. Not many people have done them, in my experience. And even a lot of CPAs and attorneys aren't super familiar with when and how to use rollovers. If you have listeners who are familiar with the real estate space, it's kind of the 1031 exchange of the startup investing world, where you can take the gains from the sale of one QSBS eligible stock and take those proceeds and invest them in new QSBS eligible stock. And there are really actually two instances where you can utilize rollovers to your advantage. The first, Roger already mentioned, and is actually one of the more powerful tools, because there is no other solution for maintaining QSBS eligibility if you sell your stock before the 5-year holding requirement outside of rollovers. Rollovers are your only solution to dealing with that problem here. The other is that if your gain exceeds the exclusion cap under 1202, and this is a little bit more broadly debated, but generally you're going to receive a new exclusion cap, so a new, in most cases, $10 million exclusion cap under QSBS per shareholder of a given stock, as well as per issuer. So every stock that you invest in and issues you stock, you should get a $10 million exemption, but also for every shareholder who owns XYZ stock should receive an exemption. And you did a podcast recently with someone who was talking about trusts and trust stacking, that strategy. That takes advantage of the first of those, which is each shareholder gets a different $10 million exclusion cap. And so that offers us a way to potentially multiply the benefits of QSBS. But the other way that is much less often used, and I can talk about why it's not used, is to consider the ability to expand QSBS by having multiple different issuers. So that is taking, say, $10 million of QSBS gain, making, I don't know, just for easy math, 10 separate new QSBS eligible investments. And presumably each of those new $10 million investments would also receive a $10 million exclusion cap. Internally at our company, we see nothing in the code that suggests that that wouldn't be how that statute is applied, similar to how we apply the per shareholder statute for trusts. And so we also take that position that it can be a multiplying tool for exits above $10 million. Again, that's debated, and our counsel is behind it. We work with DLA Piper on our structuring and the way that we think about QSBS, but happy to talk about maybe some of the reasons these rollovers aren't done traditionally or aren't done as often as we might think they would be.
Yeah. So getting back to the mechanics, just taking a step back. So I'm a founder. I've held my stock for a couple of years. It's a qualified small business and it meets all the requirements. The only thing is I've only held it for 2 years. So in order to get this exclusion from tax that you mentioned, I have to hold it for 5 years before I sell. Well, I haven't done that. So now I've sold, and now I've got 60 days, correct, to basically roll over the proceeds of that sale into a new qualified small business. And I could be more than one qualified small business as long as I get it done within the requisite amount of time. Did I say that right?
Correct. And you're not rolling over the stock, right? You're rolling over the gains from the stock that you sold. So for the investor or the shareholder, whoever the shareholder is, whether it's a founder or an investor, it's just going to be cash that you received in a wire from that transaction, and you're going to be able to redeploy that in 60 days. And for this example, where someone has sold their stock or exited their company at year 2 or 3, maybe, you're going to receive 2 advantages if you roll over those proceeds into some other investment in 60 days. The first advantage is that you're not going to pay taxes immediately. It's going to be tax deferred for the amount of time that you're in that new investment. So it's a great tool for simply deferring tax, kicking the can down the line on that amount of proceed that you rolled over.
Okay.
The second is that doing a rollover continues the QSBS holding clock. And so this is the benefit for folks who have not met that 5-year period. It's that if you sell at year 2, maybe your proceeds are $5 million. Maybe you take $1 million of that to buy a house and send your kids to school and you pay taxes on it. But now you have $4 million left over and you say, hey, this is longer horizon money. Let me take this money and put it in a new QSBS investment. So it's deferred from tax immediately. But also if I hold that new investment for, let's stick with your example and just say 3+ more years, so that my combined holding period is 2 years on the original plus 3 or more on the rollover, will be beyond 5 years for that stock. And then upon your second exit from that rollover investment, you should be able to take up to $10 million then excluded from the gains on those proceeds. So super powerful. Like I said, the only option really available to founders and investors who have exited QSBS before that 5-year holding requirement.
Yeah, and I think if I understood what you just said, you get the benefit of the holding period as well, right? We do what we call tacking. So I
That's
held
right.
2
Yep.
years. Yeah, so I held 2 years in the first one. I sell, I roll the gain into not the proceeds, but the gain into the second company. And I only have to hold that for another 3 to get the full QSBS benefit when I sell, right?
Correct. Yes. And one way that this is sometimes used is when a company is looking to sell, maybe within the next year to 3 years, it doesn't matter. But in the near-ish term, a company is looking to sell, but maybe they're incorporated differently than a C Corp. So maybe they're currently an S Corp or some other type of pass-through entity. If they do a conversion to C Corp to try and take advantage of QSBS later on, they'll have to be in that C Corp status for at least 6 months before they go and do a sale. Otherwise, even the original stock could be not considered QSBS. And so I guess the one caveat here is like, if you set something up, even if it's a C Corp and you're running your business for 2 months and someone comes by and says, wow, this is amazing, let me acquire it. You're not going to be QSBS until 6 months of original holding. So make sure that you're in your C Corp for at least 6 months before you try and do any type of rollover or any type of QSBS related transaction.
Yeah, good point. I was going to mention that. So what sorts of companies can we roll our proceeds into in the sale of QSBS?
Yeah, I wish we actually had something in the code that told us that, but what we actually get in section 1202 is just a list of things that you can't roll into, right? And so obviously we can build a list by subtraction, but the main things that the IRS isn't looking for you to qualify as QSBS or roll over into, they're sort of one and the same because the businesses that you're rolling into have to be QSBS, just like the business that you're rolling out of needed to be QSBS in order for this to work. And so the excluded businesses for QSBS treatment and for this tax benefit are things like real estate, consulting, some types of services business, like especially medical practices and such. The language in the code is businesses that rely on the skill of one, a single employee, basically, is a simple way to understand it. And so if you run a consulting business, like maybe IT consulting, and you put together decks for people and do maybe some financial modeling or something like that and send them a PDF, that's not necessarily probably going to fit under the guidelines, pay by hour, pay by project consulting, those kinds of things. But things like traditional tech businesses, tech sales, manufacturing businesses. There's a lot of medical manufacturing, pharmaceutical sales, those kinds of things that have been looked at by the IRS and have consistently passed muster. Retail, which is what we're in, retail is not excluded. So e-commerce and other forms of online retail are interesting sectors to pursue QSBS. I think a lot of the knowledge around QSBS is sort of focused on the coasts, so West Coast and East Coast, and we have a large concentration of high growth tech and engineering sort of manufacturing type businesses. And so I think those are the types of businesses that are often thought of as QSBS eligible. But I think that the scope of what QSBS is much, much larger than that, given, it's relatively narrow, the things that the code excludes. And it's mainly those single owner, single employee type consulting or service businesses.
So can we start a new business with our rollover proceeds?
Yeah, so there are two ways that you can take advantage of a rollover with those gains that you have from your original stock sale. One is that you can make an outside investment. So you can just go and buy stock in someone's startup company. So your buddy John or maybe Sequoia is raising a new fund and you can somehow you can get access. You can go and make investments to those as long as, that stock that's being issued to you is QSBS eligible. And so you can make an outside investment, but you can also just start your own business, which certainly for our serial entrepreneurs is something that, a lot of people have in their mind. They've just exited their one business and they have a ton of new ideas. So if you want to take some of that gain, start a new LLC, check C Corp status, treat yourself as a C Corp and issue stock and start running that business, that could also be QSBS as well. And so outside investment or start your own new business in a QSBS eligible way. Both of those are options for rollovers.
Okay. Yeah, and what I counsel people is if you're going to do that, you have to be careful that that money is actually used in a business and it just doesn't sit there in an incorporated pocketbook because then you don't have a qualified business to run it.
Exactly. If I can tangent a little bit here just to sort of run through why rollovers haven't been super popular, I believe. And one of those is because it's really hard to find a roller opportunity within 60 days. So you have a short clock, only 60 days, and unless you were doing diligence or really putting things in place before your exit, it can be hard to find the right opportunity within 60 days. And the way that we think about rollovers, like there's certainly a type of investor, maybe a serial angel investor who takes advantage of QSBS. and they might always be looking to roll that money forward into new investments. And so rollovers could be really beneficial to them. But most often we see founders and early stage employees who've spent, several years of their life and long hours putting their, effort into a business and now have gotten liquid. They're really thinking about rollovers from a planning perspective. And so one of the problems that we see of why CPAs, attorneys, other folks who advise founders on QSBS, why rollovers aren't often utilized or talked about, can be because the options that are out there are just, extremely risky, right? You're asking someone to make a new early stage investment into a new company that, we know the statistics on startups, most of them fail, and most of them are only moderately successful or take a really, really long time to exit. So the two risks that you run up against when you make these types of investments are I might lose all of my capital, or it might take me 7 to 14 in an unknown amount of time to liquidity. It might take me a very long time. And so it's very hard to use rollovers in a planning process if the types of businesses you're looking to roll over into fit sort of what we've traditionally thought of as, okay, QSBS is only high growth tech, SaaS businesses, these kinds of things. They can be really hard to exit from and can be extremely risky on the front end. And so that's why we've, sort of started to think a little bit differently, or not differently, but more broadly about how QSBS can be applied. And that's what led us to thinking about it in our retail context. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's the business risk. Is there any tax risk in this other than the ones we've talked about?
Well, anytime you file taxes, you're enjoying tax risk. The biggest risk whatever you write on your tax return, the biggest risk is you actually have to send it in. So file your taxes. The only thing you can really get in trouble for, like prison trouble, for most people, is not actually filing your taxes. So file your taxes at very least, and whether you pay them or not is not me or Roger's issue, I guess. But yeah, so some of the tax risk here. Certainly, if you try to elect QSBS status and you haven't done the proper diligence and worked with professionals who can attest to or comment on the legitimacy of that business or that stock, sorry, as QSBS, you could face penalties if there was an audit and the IRS found that, you kind of just had your CPA drop that on the line and, you avoided that tax for 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. But what we would tell people to do is if they're thinking about pursuing QSBS as an opportunity for their stock, is to go to a professional who understands the code and can write a memo or letter stating, hey, we've reviewed this. We believe that this stock that's been issued and is now up for sale here is QSBS. It met the requirements in these ways, and they can form an opinion on that. And so being able to append that to your tax return or to utilize that in future audits or things that might come up can save you from the IRS hitting you with fees and other burdens related to, a filing that they found to be insufficient.
Yeah, so fortunately, I mean, we have a statute. This isn't something that was created by clever tax lawyers and courts. The statute gives you a roadmap and says, if you do this, then no tax. And then the tension on this is to make sure that the business qualifies and to just basically make sure your facts are correct and that you've done your due diligence. Okay, so more about you. Who is Vint? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
That's a great question. Yeah, Vint is a wine and spirits retailer. So we tend to acquire wine and spirits in the premium and luxury category from mainly Europe and the UK. We bring them to the US through, a pretty robust infrastructure and resell direct to consumer from an online retail platform. You can think of us like, Total Wine or wine.com, anywhere that you could go online and purchase wine and have it shipped to your door. And so we serve the premium and luxury market in that space. And in the past, one thing that's made us different from those other traditional retailers is that we also have a capital markets team attached to our business. And we utilize that side of our business to create financial vehicles for the wine space and for potential investors and capital allocators to the wine space. And so in the past, we've raised investment funds where people allocate capital to, buy wine and bring it here to run through this process. We've managed entities for other people, for instance, high net worth individuals who want to participate in this trade and want to do it solo. And so we've done entities like that and been alongside partners and managed these types of fund structures for around a little over a few over 100 different entities. And so we stepped back one day and we were talking with a family office who does a lot of QSBS eligible investment. And we were actually discussing with them on that call the potential for the QSBS eligibility of one of the opportunities that we had been presenting to them. And they said, it would really be nice if when our LPs exited or founders in their network exited, that they had sort of an always available QSBS opportunity that was there, that had already been diligence and understood, and you could contribute capital to sort of whenever you needed, because that 60-day window is extremely small. And so we thought that was interesting. We set to work doing a really deep dive on QSBS, and it has been my sole focus for the better part of this past year. I have with me, we compiled a around 600-page, I call it the QSBS canon, which is basically all of the relevant academic writing that has been done on QSBS rollovers, and those types of things. And we really dove deep, and something that we found out was that what I said about the rollovers, which is the reason people don't do these isn't because they're extremely risky necessarily from a tax perspective or they're hard to understand. It's mainly that there just aren't a ton of great options when you think about it from a planning perspective. And so as we researched more, we understood that our business actually might be in the perfect place for thinking about QSBS and QSBS rollovers. And that we thought that for a couple of reasons. And one was we thought retail was really interesting because traditionally for these businesses that you might invest in, maybe they're high-tech businesses or, other, maybe like a SaaS business where your ability to value the business, get liquid on the business, and the timeline to exit is sort of all up in the air, can be for a very long time. With retail businesses, however, especially like e-commerce and other direct-to-consumer retail, most of the underlying value, the gross assets of the business are tied up in inventory. And so in theory, if you sell that inventory, now you're back to cash and you're liquid. And so we thought that retail was really interesting, and it wasn't excluded under Section 1202. And there are a ton of e-com and other retail related businesses who are funded by venture capital and who have a large blueprint in the space. And so we said, we actually have sort of the knowledge in this global luxury market, which has traditionally been extremely viable as a store of value for investors and capital allocators, a market that hasn't seen substantial downturns in many, many years, a market that's well diversified and large. And we have the infrastructure internally where we already have the retail, the e-commerce infrastructure, and we've already had a focus in the past of managing entities alongside other people, for investors and such. And so we developed the Vint Retail Partnership Program, which is functionally just a business partnership opportunity where investors, or that is, I guess, investors or shareholders, founders, whoever has a gain from QSBS stock can come to us and we can effectively help them do a rollover. So they're looking to do a rollover. They think this retail sort of space is interesting for that. And we enter a joint venture with those gain holders in order to run a QSBS eligible business.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. So this is Roger Royce with the 10,000 Startups podcast. We've been talking with Brady Weller about rollovers, qualified small business stock rollovers. If you happen to exit and don't meet the holding requirements, there's a way of deferring that gain until a later date. So Brady, I want to thank you for being here. This was good information. The last question I have for you is if people want to learn more or reach you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you're interested in doing a QSBS rollover and a rollover that is maybe on the other end of the risk spectrum than, investing in your buddy Dave's startup, you can visit qsbsrollover.com, or you can email us directly at qsbs@vint, that's vint.co, or you can email me directly at brady@vint.co.
All right. All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Roger. I appreciate it.
See you all next week.